They say talk shows used to be untouchable, our late-night escape from politics and stress. But lately, hosts have been disappearing faster than video rental stores in the 90s. First, it was quiet whispers. Now it's major headlines, firings, sanctions, controversies, accusations. The big question is, what's really going on behind the shiny curtain of America's media machine? Tonight, we uncover the domino effect hitting late-night television and why it might be about more than jokes or ratings. The fall of Jimmy Kimmel. Not long ago, Jimmy Kimmel seemed like a permanent fixture of American comedy. A man who could toss out monologues, poke fun at political figures, and wrap up the night with that perfectly polished grin. But suddenly, gone. Pulled off the stage by ABC after controversial remarks linked to a high-profile violent incident. The plot thickens when you add in the FCC, the powerful body that can literally revoke a network's license. The head of the FCC hinted at hammering down on ABC, and everyone in the industry felt the shockwaves. For viewers, it seemed like business as usual, another host in trouble. But inside the media ecosystem, it was panic mode. Because if one network could fall, who's next? But this wasn't just a random misstep. It echoed something that happened decades ago. Bill Maher's old scars. Long before cancel culture became a buzzword, one host was already living it. Bill Maher once found himself canceled right off ABC. The year was late 90s, post-9/11 tensions, political commentary, and suddenly, his show, Politically Incorrect, was gone. The headlines read, "White House keeps heat on ABC's Maher." He was branded controversial before social media even existed to amplify it. And here's the irony. Jimmy Kimmel didn't just replace some random slot. He literally stepped into the late-night chair that Maher left behind after being forced out. Now, decades later, Kimmel suffers a strikingly similar fate. History doesn't just repeat, it recycles its scripts. If you look behind the curtain, it's not just about edgy jokes. It's about the power games between politics and networks.
The media under pressure networks like ABC are supposed to be bold, creative giants.
But when political pressure builds, courage doesn't always last long. Maher sarcastically put it best years later. ABC might as well stand for always be caving. Beneath the laughter, there's a chilling truth. A broadcast empire worth billions, trembling at the thought of government threats. And who pays the price? The host who dare to step outside the carefully drawn lines. The system quietly tells them, you're replaceable. Be funny, but not too funny. Be controversial, but only in the way ratings like, not in the way regulators hate. And yet, even in this pressure cooker, comedy finds a way to slip in. The best way to hide a hard truth? Wrap it in a ridiculous joke. Absurd humor in a scary climate. To cope with the tension, late night leans on humor, even when the joke is sharper than the punchline suggests. Imagine Good Morning America rebranded as Good Morning America, even the people who didn't vote the right way. That's satire, but satire with a dagger hidden inside. And the jokes didn't stop there. Whispers of Rudy Giuliani as the Golden Bachelor. Pitches for a brand new show called Morning Wood with James Woods. Funny? Sure. Ridiculous? Absolutely. But behind that laughter, the audience senses an uncomfortable truth. When everyone is scared, you end up laughing at absurdity, because the alternative is realizing how much speech is being silenced. And this is where the conversation turns serious again. Because jokes aside, people are losing real careers over words. Can you fire someone over a comment? Kimmel's comments stirred the storm. He argued that certain groups were painting a violent attacker as anything but one of their own. Was it tasteless? Maybe. Was it malicious? That depends who you ask. But here's the real dilemma. Should words, especially awkward, debatable, or even wrong words, be enough to end a 2-decade career? Critics said yes, freedom has limits. Supporters said absolutely not, because free speech exists precisely to protect unpopular opinions. And then there's reality. Networks don't care about philosophy when advertisers start sweating. That's when principles suddenly fade into the background. Audiences laughed, cried, debated, but to the decision-makers up top, it was about brand safety, not truth. Still, the chaos around this specific incident exposed something so bizarre it almost feels like a parody of reality. The absurd side of scandal. When reporters dug into the attacker's private life, they discovered something wild. Bizarre gaming habits, virtual reality escapades, and, let's just say, colorful online communities. Suddenly, late-night jokes weren't about politics. They were about this surreal vision of a young man lost in cartoon worlds. Clips and soundbites flew, comparing the seriousness of violence with the absurdity of online escapism. But, in a strange way, it proved the point. Maybe labeling extremists as representatives of a political team misses the reality that many are simply unstable individuals. The story blurred tragedy with absurd humor, which is exactly why it dominated headlines. It was too weird not to talk about. Yet, once the laughter faded, a bigger storm was brewing. How far could political leaders push their influence on the press? Trump, lawsuits, and Antifa. The controversies reached new heights when former President Trump sued the New York Times for billions, called mainstream outlets mouthpieces, and even floated tariffs on something as innocent as Wordle. Outrageous? Sure. But also revealing, because suddenly free speech wasn't a shield, it was a battlefield. Meanwhile, anti-fascist groups like Antifa got labeled as terrorist organizations, except they barely had structure, no leader, no office, no fixed plan. Trying to describe Antifa as an organized group was like describing jazz as a rigid military march. The chaos became comedy, and comedy became commentary. People kept asking, is this democracy's messy reality, or the slow erosion of its freedom? And that brings us back to where it all started. What happens after the spotlight fades? Falling, rising, and what stays the same? For Jimmy Kimmel, this scandal may feel like the end of a long and successful career. But history tells us something different. Bill Maher lost his seat only to return stronger, with a new show and an even bigger audience. 2 decades later, he reminded Jimmy, and the audience, that sometimes a firing isn't failure, it's stage 1 of a comeback. So what are we really watching here? A comedy feud? A media war? Or the constant cycle of voices being silenced, only to find louder microphones elsewhere? Whatever the case, one truth remains. In a world where laughter is risky and honesty is punishable, maybe the bravest punchline is still speaking at all.